Hi, everyone, and welcome to Wholesale Change, the webcast and podcast from Distribution Strategy Group, where we offer thought leadership for wholesale change agents like you. My name's Ian Heller. I'll be your co-host today, along with the lovely and talented Jonathan Bein, PhD, my business partner and good friend. Jonathan, how are you today?
Glad to be working with somebody who is also talented and lovely.
Well, thank you so much, sir. I would like to compliment you on your excellent ability to judge people.
Discernment, yes.
Discernment it is. Hey, we have a great show today. We're going to introduce him here shortly. We're going to talk about how to turn inside sales reps into home run hitters. But before we do that, we need to do just a little business. We want to thank our first sponsor, which is Epicor, a company that has been helping thousands of wholesale distributors integrate all of their business functions into one enterprise resource planning or ERP system for more than 50 years. Because of their deep experience in the distribution business, they get you and your unique distribution challenges. Their ERP solutions were designed with distributors for distributors. That just means that their solutions are built specifically with the right functionality for the distribution world. They're ready to use out of the box without complex and expensive customizations. It's one of the top reasons new customers tell Epicor they selected Epicor for distribution solutions over others. You can learn more about Epicor at epicor.com/distribution. That's epicor.com/distribution. Fantastic. And now we're going to thank, guess what? A brand new product being launched by Distribution Strategy Group. It's DSG Analytics. Jonathan, you're going to give us a description. Take it away.
Very simple idea. You want to know how much gold is in them bar hills. How do you know how much the wallet is for an existing customer? Where do you find prospects that fit your ideal customer profile? How big is your market and what is our share of it? We have a customer demand analytics platform that allows you to answer these questions. Next slide.
Bing.
And the platform allows you to understand the spend by product category and to do a gap analysis. So in this example, you can see there are actually 4 product categories where there's quite a bit of runway left. The shop supplies, safety, electrical, and cutting tools, where there's quite a bit of opportunity left in this existing account for you to go get. So once you have this information, it changes how your field sales and your proactive inside salespeople and your marketing approach the market and allows you to grow wallet share and market share.
Yeah, so to our podcast listeners, we're showing a graphic that shows that this tool will give you specific information about the gaps between what's addressable or achievable by product category and what you have today. It's based on real data. We think it's really the best data out there. Jonathan, how can people get a hold of you?
Jonathan Bein, jbein at distributionstrategy.com, 303-898-8636. Don't leave home without it.
Absolutely. Okay, good. Now, pleasure to introduce our guest for the day, someone I've worked with for about 20 years who taught me a lot, and I can't wait to learn more. Welcome to the show, Mr. Mark Peck. So I got to give you a little bit of background on how Mark and I met. So I had just finished up a 15-year run at Grainger. I started off as a truck unloader. I've been the VP of marketing. Thought I knew a thing or two about sales and marketing. Then when I was at Newark Electronics, running marketing and merchandising, we hired this character out of Wisconsin who came in his humble, low-key way. I just told him before the show that his character flaw is that he's too nice. But this character came along and is very professorial with devastating, accurate way, using lots and lots of data, proved to me that I didn't know nearly as much as I thought. That was the beginning of a 20-year education. I really should start paying you just for the lessons I've learned from you, Mark, on how to integrate inside sales and outside sales and customer service. So with that as the caveat, welcome to the show.
But let me add one piece, but also Mark had such a passionate response to our last session on proactive inside sales.
Oh, yeah.
that we felt compelled to have him come in and share his piece on this, which was we think a great compliment to what we shared before. And I would also point out, even though the title has got home run in it, Mark is actually a college basketball player. He's 6'8". So we're bridging sports here.
Yeah. Well, I think, that is kind of funny because after the last show, Mark, we'll let you talk in a minute. We'll hand it over to you. But Mark reached out in his nice, gentle way and basically said, there's so much you left out that you gave your audience useful, but in not actionable information. You should have me on to clarify the rest. Those aren't the words he used, but that was the net effect. Admit it, Mark.
I admit it, Ian. So that was what I meant. And by the way, I thought it was closer to 25 years ago that we started working together, but because I think it was back when I was maybe 18 years old.
Yeah, you're right.
Smiling when
25 years ago, I was 15. So that's probably right.
Okay, so we're going to talk about inside sales.
Yeah, and in all those years of consulting, Mark, where do you start with these customers? I mean, what is it that they're missing that leads them not to understand that they really need to look at inside sales differently? Is it that they're measuring the wrong things?
I've worked with a lot of clients that have had existing teams. In fact, most companies, most distributors do have some existing team, whether it's a few people or a large team. And they always struggle a bit with trying to understand the metrics. How do I measure this thing? And how do I use the metrics to manage this as a business? And what I find is they end up measuring what they can measure or what's convenient to measure or what they understand. So I see people measure things like, I'm going to measure number of calls, and I'm going to use that as a metric to manage the team.
Mm-hmm.
Or I'm going to, because I can do it, I'm going to measure talk time because that seems important and use that to manage the team. And not that either of those are bad measurements, but when they stand by themselves, they cause, what I call it, sort of inappropriate behavior on the inside sales reps' parts. I can always optimize talk time. Doesn't mean it's selling time.
Right.
I can always optimize the number of calls by dialing the phone a lot, but doesn't mean I'm even getting through to customers. So that issue, it always becomes an issue with distributors. How do I measure this thing and measure it in a way that's productive and helps me manage that part of the business?
Yeah. So one thing we do want to encourage our audience to take to ask questions. Please use the Q&A function in the toolbar of Zoom. But Mark, I mean, are you talking about measurements for people who already have outbound sales function in place, or because a lot of distributors don't even have that? They have a function they call inside sales, which is really customer service. And I don't mean that to diminish it. It's super important. And
absolutely,
customers have great loyalty to their inside salespeople, but they aren't really salespeople in the sense that they're doing account management and generating proactively sales, right?
What I'm talking about is a system. It's a sort of a system of measurements to manage outbound, proactive inside sales. And you need it whether you're starting a new group or whether it's an existing team you have in place. It helps you. It's one of the tools that can help you notch up performance, coach appropriately, and actually, to the title of this session, turn your inside sales reps into home run hitters.
Yeah, and I want to get to the home run hitting part, but I do think I mean, you've done a lot of work with us. You did a 3-part series of webinars last year, and you've done some other work with us that people should really refer to. But distributors need to accept up front that their inside salespeople are never going to be effective outbound sellers. You can't blend the role in the case of most people, right? They can't be customer service people who handle inbound calls and be effective outbound callers. I mean, the psychographics of those individuals is radically different. So you have to get to this baseline where you just accept that your inside salespeople are not going to be account managers over the phone, no matter what you call them. They're really
Yeah.
more customer service. And then once you are ready to create an outbound calling group that, is a proactive inside sales group, then you're ready to start talking about how to turn them into home run hitters, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And it's conceivable. This is sort of the exception. The people that move from customer service, the inbound group, to the outbound group, and are successful are an exception. That I've seen a lot of people try to move and not make it and end up back in customer service. But a few people do, but that's the exception to the rule. That's not the rule. It's just like turning a good inside salesperson into the sales manager. It rarely is successful, but occasionally it is.
We have two questions lined up here from the same person, Eric. Thank you. First is, I love to tie inside sales to a team sales or a gross margin metric. Team is usually a geography or a customer segment, so they're assigned some broader territory. Thoughts?
I have a question back for Eric. Does the team include outside salespeople and inside salespeople, or is it only inside salespeople in the team?
Yes, it's inbound and outbound, he's saying. Or excuse me, it's outside and inside.
Okay. I think that's an excellent model. In fact, I authored a book that
which I love.
That just focuses on that model called integrated account management,
Right.
which I believe you can still find on Amazon. And if you can't, I have copies. I could get someone a copy if they absolutely needed the copy and couldn't find one on Amazon. But I think that's a great model, and I think the system of metrics that we're going to talk about would apply there also.
But the other thing Eric says is, I don't want to accept that customer service can't be sellers. We need to train, support, and incent them.
I think he's absolutely right. They can sell. They react to the customer. They sense the customer's needs, and they can sort of cross-sell, upsell. But to have them be outbound, prospecting, pushing new opportunities, is typically not a good behavioral fit. And what you see when you try to convert a big team of those people into outbound sellers is they gravitate toward the inbound, they gravitate towards being reactive, and they gravitate towards solving the customer's problems.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing wrong with any of that. It's very important for the business. It just doesn't drive the same productivity model that you want in an outbound salesperson.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's been my experience. When you try to turn them into something they're not, it just doesn't work, right? I mean, I think actually the worst part of it is there's like 10% of people who can do both, and they trick everybody into thinking that everyone can do both,
Yeah.
So they'll go, hey, we tried this new outbound calling program, so when you guys aren't busy, you can call this list of, customers that have bought for a while. Look at Barbara over in branch 123. She's crushing it. How come the rest of you can't do that? It would almost be better if nobody could do it. But since like 5 or 10% of people can, it dupes the sales leadership into thinking that, man, if we just push hard enough, everybody else will do what Barbara does. And it just never works.
Yeah. So would it be helpful to sort of walk through this system, this model?
Sure. All right, let me bring it up here.
So it's, let me talk it through, and then let's talk about it and how you use it. It's a model with 7 elements. So, and it's actually an equation. It's an equation where the result is how much revenue either a person or a team generates. But the steps, the elements, tell you how they get there. So it's a simple model, 7 steps. I'll just go through them. It's calling hours. So how many hours, work hours they're there, whether they're actually on the phone or doing pre-call prep or post-call prep. So calling hours times dials per hour times contacts per dial. And contacts I define as substantive dialogue with a decision maker. So you dial the phone a lot, you get to some decision makers and you get them to engage in a conversation. That's a contact. Dialing the phone and leaving a voicemail is not. So calling hours times dials per hour times contacts per dial times proposals per contact. So how often do you try to sell, pitch a product, put an offer out there to customers? That times close rate. Out of all the proposals, how often do you close it? That times average order size gives you revenue. So you could take two inside salespeople at the same revenue level, and the model is significantly different. And I've seen this play out a number of times. And what the model tells you, what the equation tells you, is what they do well and what they don't do well. But it tells you what they do well that's driving the revenue, their revenue performance.
Right, because you can put metrics around each step of the 7, right? And see what's driving the revenue.
Yeah, and you do have metrics to some degree for each step. So if I take an individual person, I see how many calling hours, and you think if I have a team of 10 people, they're pretty equal. Maybe they're working 6 hours a day out of 8 hours. They're actually on the phones, not
Right.
talk time, but prep, post-call work. So I take that, and then dials per hour. I've got 10 people. They're all going to be different. You know, it's a really basic measure of productivity. How aggressively are they dialing and getting to the next call? Might even tell you how much call planning they're doing or not doing.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes people with call aversion do too much call planning. That's not unusual to see in an inside sales environment. And then we get to contacts per dial. Well, you'll see some of your inside salespeople are really good at sort of timing the calls or scheduling calls or getting through screens, getting through receptionists or getting through an assistant to get to the decision makers. Or once they get a decision maker on the phone, they're good at keeping them on the phone. So they turn more dials into contacts than others. But you have to have that contact in that conversation before you can start to sell. And then you get to the next one, which is proposals per contact. Well, once I get in that conversation with the customer, how good am I, or how good is that inside salesperson at identifying the needs, at asking the right questions to get at the needs, and then positioning some of our products against those needs to actually propose something. So you'll see a lot of variation there. Then you get to close rate. Well, once they offer something, once they propose something, how good are they at listening to the customer and understanding the objections and responding to those objections, and how sometimes assertive are they at actually closing? Are they a good closer? So we see the close rate come into effect there. And then we have average order size. Did they cross-sell? Do they upsell?
Mm-hmm.
How effective are they at doing that? And that all ends up leading to revenue. So that's how the model works together. And when you have it, you can, it becomes a coaching tool. And if you have a team of 10 people, you can see, oh, I have person A over here. I have John here, who's really good at getting through to decision makers and getting contacts, much better than the rest of the team. Let's calibrate with John, and let's teach the other people what he's doing to get through to customers. Or I have Betty over here who's got the best close rate. Let's find out what she does to close. So it helps you in that regard manage performance and all the elements that lead to revenue, and begin to use this as a coaching tool, and begin to use it to identify your stars in your inside sales team, and find out what they're doing to make a difference in this model.
Yeah, I love this. I've, worked around inside sales models for years. I've never seen this before, but it's so holistic, and it gives people, really the ability to make some trade-offs where they're strong, right? And it might be that, look, I don't make as many dials per hour, but I'm better at getting through because I'm more thoughtful about how I do it. Or I don't make as many contacts, but the ones I do turn into bigger orders and I have a better close rate. And, so it allows people to leverage where they're strong and then work on areas where they're not, because they have data about how they're doing versus other people, and they have their own metrics. And it doesn't the problem with things like dials per hour or conversations per hour is it can really drive a lot of bad behavior, to your opening point, Mark.
Oh, absolutely.
you know,
People
you can-
will,
Go ahead.
if you give them a metric, your good people will find a way to hit it.
Right.
They'll find a way to perform within that metric. And sometimes, I mean, I don't know how many times I've seen people with a talk time metric just spend more time in the conversation or solve the customer service problem for a customer, or, they'll find a way to hit the metric if you give them one.
Sure.
What occurs to me when I look at these metrics, so again, the first two are calling hours and dials per hour. That's just kind of showing up. That doesn't particularly require skill, right? It's just,
Absolutely,
it's
yeah.
just showing up. But the skill shows up really in the next metrics, which are the contacts per dials. Like you mentioned, some people are better at getting through proposals per contract, per contact. That's just straight selling ability, right? And close rate. And then also the sales rep can have some effect on the average order size. So, so the skill really shows up in the last four: contacts per dial, proposals per contact, close rate, and average order size.
That's also, when you see a team of good salespeople, they all sell a little bit different. It's not like they're
Right.
Clones of each other. And if you have 10 salespeople working and they worked with the same customer, you'd probably have a somewhat different performance level here. And so this allows the salespeople to perform differently, but allows you to see where they're doing really well and where they're not, and allows you to work those issues with them. And in a way that you can drive revenue, and you can see how this, I mean, it's just you run the equation, it leads to revenue.
Yeah. And speaking of the equation, we'll make sure this is on the Wholesale Change page. So if you go to distributionstrategy.com and click on Wholesale Change, this episode will be on there. I'll figure out how to put a link in to this presentation. So if you're a podcast listener, you'll be able to see this slide. But we do have another question from a listener. Tom wants to know, how do you measure each of these steps, Mark, particularly the calling hours, dials per hour, and contacts per dial?
If you have a CRM, and I would hope most people that are running an inside sales program have a CRM, some type of CRM system. You can set that up in a way to get some of these metrics. Now, dials per hour, probably the best thing you can do is use your phone system to get your dials. So if you have a CRM and you can integrate it with your phone system, you're going to get most of these. The other ones, some of these are more self-reported by the inside sales team. So if they're in the CRM, only they can tell if they have a decision maker on the phone. The CRM can't necessarily tell that, and whether they're having a substantive dialogue with that decision maker. So you need, what I've seen work effective is when they flag in the CRM whether this is a contact or not, or they flag whether they propose something in this contact or not. So some of these things are self-reported, but all tracked within the CRM, other than maybe dials might come in from and integrated with the CRM from the phone system.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think, my experience is that even in distributors that have had a hard time implementing a CRM with their outside sales force, it gets adopted very enthusiastically by the outbound callers because they need this to work off of. It's just an efficient way for them to work. They've got their contact data in front of them. They've got, they can look at the notes from previous calls. They can see transactions if your CRM is configured that way. And so the whole reluctance around CRM adoption that you find with an outside sales force is flipped on its head with an inside sales force who's doing proactive calls where they get the tool immediately. They're sitting at a screen, they're clicking the dial in many cases. So if you're reluctant or you've had trouble with the CRM for your outside sales force, don't let that color your impression of what kind of adoption you'll get with a group of outbound callers. In my experience, you just don't have that problem. They love it.
In fact, to go back to the question and comment we had from, I think it was Eric earlier. When you have an integrated team inside and outside, you find that inside takes more control over the data, the CRM system, than the outside. And the way to keep your database accurate is to let the inside team do it rather than the outside team, because they're, like you said, they're at the screen all day, and they're typically working with a much larger base of customers than the outside. So they need something to track not only all the customers, but all our activity.
Exactly. Right. All right. What next, Mark?
Well, I thought it'd be helpful to talk a little bit about coverage and building a coverage model. We see a lot of things, or I've seen a lot of things over the years. I tell you, I've been in consulting for 40 years, but then I'd have to tell you that I started when I was 10 years old.
Well, I'm sure you did.
But with inside sales, we frequently see, and I think you mentioned it on your last podcast, the tendency is to overload the inside salespeople. And I'll give each inside salesperson, pick the number, 300, 400, or some large number of accounts.
Right.
But when you run the numbers and run the math and look at the kind of coverage you get into those accounts, you end up, I've seen situations where the inside salespeople never talk to a third of their accounts.
Sure.
They have assigned accounts and they never talk to them. So, and the important thing is to see the coverage. In fact, we've seen it in times when I've worked with DSG where you apply the analytics. Well, if we don't cover an account, the wallet share is small. If we cover it with inside sales, it increases by about a factor of 5 or 6. When we cover it with outside sales, it increases even more. But if we put it in inside sales and nobody talks to the account, guess what? We're getting the smallest percentage of wallet share. So it's important to understand that we're optimizing wallet share, and we optimize wallet share with a good coverage plan. So I find it's important to actually lay it out and do the math. To look at, okay, inside sales, how frequently are we going to talk to customers, and actually do the math and figure out how many contacts can an inside salesperson make in a year.
Yeah, well, I think this is part of a broader issue, which is that most distributors don't have a plan for how frequently they're going to contact each customer, right? And we know that there's some correlation between frequency of contact and frequency of purchase. And yet distributors have often thousands, sometimes tens of thousands of accounts and contacts in their system, and there's no structured plan to reach out to them. And that's whether it's by email or by an outbound sales call or by direct mail or a sales rep. And really, and this is something we learned from you as well, Mark, early on, is that you need a plan to multiply the number of outbound contacts you make, because for a couple of reasons. One is you want to remain relevant and have the customer think of you when they need something. But, as Jonathan has often pointed out, not only, we don't just segment customers segment their distributors, and they think of this distributor is my air compressor person, and this distributor is my motors person, and this distributor is my tools person. And if you're going to overcome that, you have to constantly educate them about what you sell, right? And the other thing is, they don't know, even if they think of you, sometimes they don't know what you sell. You constantly have to remind them of what you sell. And if you doubt that, then walk through a branch sometime with a customer, and you'll hear at some point them say or ask, when did you start carrying that product? When in fact, you've carried that product for 30 years. They just don't know it, but we know what we sell, so we assume our customers do too. So you need this aggressive, robust contact strategy that applies not only to outbound callers, but to email and direct mail and to outbound sellers.
And we know, and we all know a lot of distributors that have very broad product lines.
Right.
To the extent that even that sometimes some parts of the sales team don't know all the products in their line. And so how would customers find that out?
Right. Right.
So, so what you see, you know, if you start an inside sales program, you take a set of customers and hand them to an inside salesperson and let them do their thing. What they tend to do is follow the path of least resistance. So they'll talk to the customers that seem like that behave like they want to talk to the salesperson. They'll focus on the large customers that order every week. And they won't find time for the bottom half. And the bottom half probably are typically smaller buyers, but the bottom half probably has some what I'd call diamonds in the rough that with the right coverage strategy can really move up. So what we tend to do is what I like to do is have a coverage model that varies the coverage for inside sales based upon what the account is worth today to me and what the account could be worth. So it's important to try to find a way to grade those customers, and in the slide we have up here, we actually have 5 grades. We have A through D for customers that are buyers today, and we have E for non-buying customers for prospects. And those could be customers that have gone dormant, or customers that we just have on our in our sites that have never purchased from us. And typically, you know, I'd like to think of this as sort of a Pareto analysis, an 80-20. Typically, we'll see the top 20% of the customers put in the top 2 grades in the A's and B's, and that's most cases 80%, and with most distributors, more like 90% or more of their revenue. That would be more likely. It's highly skewed to the top. Right. So we want to make sure we're talking to those at a frequency that's meaningful for that kind of value from the customer. Sure. If they buy once a week, we probably want to talk to them at least once a week. So at those top levels, we have high frequency. At the lower levels with prospects, we maybe want to talk to them 2 or 3 times a year. But if we don't have a coverage model and a way to track that, those typically get lost in the equation. And even the middle of that account base will frequently get lost in the equation. So I find it's helpful on the front end when you're, number one, when you're planning an inside sales team and you're planning to launch it, it's helpful to build a conceptual coverage model because you want to set an expectation with your inside sales people, but you also want to make sure you have you're calculating and giving them an appropriate territory size. If you give them 400 customers and they can do 2,500 to 4,000 contacts a year, they're going to have a hard time getting to all those customers on a meaningful basis. So you're balancing how many customers you can give them, and that affects your cost of selling. You're balancing how much I invest in the top layers of my customers versus the bottom layers and prospects, and you're balancing that against the economics in each grade level of customer. So this is a model that is helpful on the front end, sort of sizing territories for inside salespeople, and then setting expectations. And then on the back end, when you're managing the team, setting expectations for coverage, and then tracking against that expectation for coverage. You know, it used to be, you know, what's a minimum to have a relationship with a customer?
Right.
Is it meaningful to talk to an active customer once a year? And then the other thing I find is both this and the metrics are becoming even more important in inside sales organizations when people are moving to a hybrid or a remote environment, because you're trying to manage an inside sales team when you don't necessarily have the person in front of you every day, all day.
So, Mark, we had a question from Ron. What kind of targeting is done before the outbound calls? That's question one. And then the second one is, what are some of the learnings for those who are successful in getting to the right person and how they position the call?
So what was that first question, Jonathan? Can you?
What kind of targeting is done before the outbound call? Targeting.
I think it's how do you choose who to call? And I think he answered this question a little like 10 minutes ago before you put up this slide. But I think what you talked about is you need a way to assign some type of potential, whether it's through a scoring model or something.
Yeah.
And then you're going to bucket them into the A through D, A through actually E, if you know, from high potential to they're not buying at all, right?
Yep.
So what goes into those equations? Is that or what goes into that bucketing? I think might be one step further in that question.
Well, the first element is what they actually buy from you. So it's your current sales volume with that customer. The second is that potential. So you might have a more sophisticated model like the analytics Jonathan talked about earlier, but also you might have something more simplistic. You might say all companies in this SIC code or in this industry, if you have an industry coded database, are worth this much to us. But the third element that I like to use, which is important, is if you can vary that potential based upon your likelihood to get it. Just knowing that they buy this much is helpful, but there's some customers where you're never going to get the full potential. And there are reasons for that. I mean, and sometimes letting the inside salesperson or the salesperson that works with the account determine what that likelihood is helpful, because they know some things about the account that you won't know unless you talk to it. Like, okay, this person buys these products from us, but this other product B, he buys from a company where his brother-in-law works, and we're never going to get that business, so, or whatever. But you'll see scenarios where the customer buys something, but you won't get that business for whatever reason. And it's helpful to be able to accommodate that when you look at a grading model and when you look at your targeting within your account base. And I think they're all sort of targeted, but targeted at different levels. We're willing to make a different investment in our A customers than we are in our D customers.
Right. And what are the learnings? So for those who have been successful at getting to the right person and how they position the call, are there some general trends you've seen that made them successful?
I'd say when you start this is I'd be cautious not underestimate what these accounts can be worth. They're always more than you expect. And you need to understand where your break even is, but don't set your expectations too low.
Interesting. Okay, so you think there's a tendency to underestimate? There's
a tendency to underestimate, absolutely. And I think that's why it's helpful sometimes to get outside data to sort of validate those estimates. And if you have the sales team be the exclusive estimator, the people that are the primary people driving the estimates, they're going to tend to be very low. They will, because I'm getting all I can from this customer. We're getting 100%.
Yeah.
And I state that, and I'm being a little flippant because it's not that extreme, but it's close to that.
And
Some of the salespeople
they're
will-
sincere about that also, right? They're not gaming you. They sincerely believe they have that much of the wallet.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, and I even though I say that in jest, 10% of all jokes are intended to be true. There's 10% truth in every joke.
Love
Right.
it.
At least 10%.
So we have another question from Lauren. She wants to know, what does compensation look like for each role, inside sales versus outside sales?
Depends how you have it structured. I'll go back to Eric's question earlier with an integrated sales team. You want, well, let me start. I always like to see it be a portion variable and a significant portion variable based upon performance. If you have an integrated team, I think you won't get what you want out of the team unless the variable portion is based upon the team selling, the team revenue. So that's an element. If it's just inside sales, and even inside and outside sale and integrated teams together, I like to see the variable have a overall volume component to it, but also have a growth volume tied to it. So what I've seen be pretty effective is if you set a goal based upon previous year sales, and then look at growth on top of that previous year sales, that would be the goal. And then they get a percentage of the total and a percentage of growth above historical performance, and maybe a stretch goal that takes you even beyond that with a higher percentage. I don't know. I think I explained that okay. That makes
I think
sense.
that's the structure, but I mean, generally speaking, the outbound callers make less than the outside salespeople, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a little bit high risk, a little bit lower risk job than outside sales, a little less demanding. Typically, I'd say inside sales at a compensation level that's maybe 60 to 70% of outside sales.
But also much lower T&E.
Absolutely, a lot lower T&E.
Right.
And those numbers will vary by geography, right? So what you're paying for a sales rep or a proactive inside sales rep in New York is going to be different than what you're paying for it in Texas, probably, right?
What I think is most effective is if you have a base and a variable. If you're pretty stable with the base and you let the variable drive the difference.
We got a ton of questions here, Mark.
Go ahead, Jonathan. Go ahead.
So, what will be the range for an inside sales rep near New York City? I mentioned New York, and somebody's like, "What should we be paying in New York City?"
It's been a few years since I've worked with this inside sales team in New York City, but I think, I'll throw a wild guess out there. Trying to understand what maybe has changed in the last couple of years. I haven't been to New York City since the pandemic hit. I think you're in the higher part of the range, obviously, in New York City, higher than you'd be in Denver or in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I guess, and it also depends on industry. Some industries you're going to be higher than others, but I guess if you're not in the, I'm going to give you a wide range. I'm going to say 60 to 100,000, all in.
All in. So that's not just base. That's commission.
Not just base.
Total comp.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what I like to see people do is do a base that's sort of minimal is not the right word, but sort of a living wage base, and the variable allows them to get significantly above that. But the variables all economically justified based upon their performance within the company.
Right. Jonathan, you want to take the next one from Eric?
Yeah, I was expecting somebody to ask about the salaries in Arkansas, but we didn't get that question yet. So
Don't give them any ideas.
okay. So outside sales is higher variable, and meaning commission in this case. This is Eric's opinion. Inside sales is less variable. He says he likes to keep things simple. For inside, he goes with bonuses tied to target dollars for the whole team as opposed to commission. So comment, I guess the question to you is bonus versus commission as part of the total comp. Do you have a preference for the one versus the other?
I like the commission a little better than bonuses. Now, depending on how you structure it, they can work very similarly. But with commission, you get the smaller incremental improvements, and people are rewarded on that. Where with bonuses, they're more stepped, if you know what I mean.
Right.
So they're rewarded on the big steps, but they're not rewarded on the small incremental change to get to those steps that they are in the bonus. And I think they're more motivated to get those in. So you get to the end of the month, or depending on when you pay out the bonus or commission, or you get to the end of whatever the pay period is, whether it's monthly, quarterly, or annually, they're not motivated to get that little bit of increment that they are with the commission when it's a bonus, because they're only motivated if they can get all the way to the next step.
Okay, I think that's a terrific answer. We have a question about another locale, which is one of the U.S. minor outlying islands. I'm just kidding. So I think we're probably pretty good at this point. Anything else you want to add, Mark?
I can't think of anything at this point.
I do want to say that Eric's asked several different questions and jumped in. Eric's going to be on the show. We can't wait to talk to him because this is such a fascinating topic. But, one thing I wanted to talk about, Mark, before we wrap up is that, this it's easy to underestimate the power of proactive inside sellers. And if you think about, like, most distributors have an outside sales force, right? When they're looking, their outside sales force is out there elephant hunting, and they're competing with a bunch of other distributors who also have elephant hunters in the field, right? So there's tremendous competition for these big customers and relatively lower margins because these are big customers and big potential for every distributor. The most natural progression to expand your demand generation is to move into the mid-market with outbound sellers, because you already know how to manage the sales force. There are some things you have to adapt and learn that you've talked about today, but it is still managing a sales force that has accounts assigned to them and has compensation and bonuses or commissions. And, so it's not like this is installing a capability that you have no background in, right? I mean, you're taking your outside sales competencies and you're moving them to managing outbound sellers, but you're moving into this mid-market. And there are two big advantages. One is there's typically less selling competition because a lot of distributors don't have this functionality. So it's very common for these outbound sellers to say, hey, I talked to this customer and no one's called on him in 3 years. He was so happy to hear from me because he feels like somebody cares, right?
Absolutely.
And the second big advantage is this mid-market goes at significantly higher margins, gross margins, than these big customers. And so if you cultivate this, you're dealing with less competition and higher margins. And Jonathan, looks like you wanted to jump in.
Yeah, I think just to your point on the higher margins, in the construction world, it's 4 to 6, maybe 7 points higher margins for the ones that are on the proactive inside sales accounts.
Right.
Industrial, it can be as high as 10 points higher margin, literally. So it's material difference in margin and therefore profitability.
Yeah. So I would encourage everyone, if you go back to October, November of 2021, if you go to distributionstrategy.com, click on events, you'll find 3 webinars that Mark did for us last year about this time that we're really laid all this out in great detail. Like I said, I'll make sure these slides are available online under the Wholesale Change tab. We do have a couple of upcoming events I wanted to tell you about. On December 7th, we're having a panel discussion. This is going to be great. We have one manufacturer who manages distributors for his company and 2 distributor executives who are going to talk about e-commerce. And they're going to talk about, what the technology stack is, how they succeed, what their challenges have been. It's going to be a fascinating, moderated discussion. We encourage you to go to our events page and sign up for that. That's brought to you by Epicor, who is also one of the sponsors of today's show. So we thank Epicor for their ongoing support for our research. We spend a lot of money on research, and the only reason we can do that is because companies like Epicor sponsor it. So thanks to Epicor. Then December 14th, we're absolutely delighted to host Tony Harris on this show. He's the founder of Think B2B. He was the CMO at DigiKey, tremendously successful electronic components distributor. Tony is a fascinating guy. We're going to have a great discussion. So please go to Wholesale Change and sign up for that. I put Mark Peck's contact information at the bottom of the page. It's mpeck@apexgroup.com. So please reach out to mpeck@apexgroup. That's APEXX group, 2 X's, mpeck@apexgroup.com, or just reach out to us and we can put you in touch with him. Mark, thanks so much for spending this time with us today and putting together this information. We really appreciate it.
You're welcome. I appreciate being on the show.
Yeah, I can't wait to continue to work with you. Jonathan, always a pleasure, my friend. I love doing this show with you. It's one of the highlights of, 2 of the highlights of my month is doing 2 shows with you a month. So thanks to everyone for joining us. We'll see you on the next episode of Wholesale Change. And until then, happy sales to you. On that sour note,
Bill Murray's got nothing on you when it comes to the lounge singer.
That's not saying much. Until then, thanks a lot. Have a great day. Bye now.